So for today's lesson, we're going to be solving nonlinear systems. Now, think about what we did with systems before. When we were solving a system of linear equations, we started off by graphing a line, and then we would, let's say, graph another line. And when we were solving a system, our ultimate goal was to always find that point, right? This is the point that they both had in common. So when we were solving a system, our solution was that point where the two lines meet. Well, these are nonlinear systems. So that means we're going to start working with more parabolas and maybe some other equations that they're going to throw at us. But we're still looking for the same thing. We're looking for the point of intersection for a lot of these. We've answered questions like this before where they want specific values for each one. So, for instance, when I'm looking at f of x, I'm going to give it a little bit of color here so that we can see it, if you can see it there. And of course, let's see, maybe I should use this instead. There's my g of x. So I'm going to take a moment, and anywhere in my problem where I see g of x, I am going to highlight the letter G in all of my questions here. And then, of course, yes, we have this little value over here. There we go. We have the f function, which gave it a little pink color there. So anywhere I see the letter f, I'm going to make sure we look for it in our problem. Okay, so let's answer the questions again. This is very similar to what we already did in Unit 1. So it's back again because we just need to know how to read our graphs, especially when they start to get a little more complicated. So we have g of x and f of x. So here is the first question. It says f of -2. Remember, this is my x. All they're looking for is a y value. That's it. Remember, that's how we keep it nice and simple. So if x is -2, well, here's -2. Now I can scan down, but I'm not going to hit the f graph. We're trying to hit the pink one. So then we go up and we see a point of contact right there. That point of contact is right at -2, comma, and then it's kind of tough to see there with the lines, but it looks like it might be the 1.5 right there. So 1.5, and just like that, we have our answer, 1.5. So they're going with decimals on this one. That's fine. All right, so we have our first value here, of course. And that's us just looking at the number 2. I know that if the lines were there, it'd be a little bit easier. G of -1. All right, so now I'm going to look for G of -1. Yes, there's the X. So once again, we're looking for a Y value that goes with it. And if G is equal to -1, let's see. Well, first of all, here's -1. Well, notice I'm already on the G graph. That point right there is -1, comma 0. Well, just like that, we have our answer for this first problem, or for the second question there. G of -1 would just be a 0 because of what I'm seeing in my picture. Okay, next question. What is x when f of x is equal to -1? Well, remember, when they give us this value out here, this is our y value. Our y is equal to -1, which only means one thing. They want to know the x value that goes with that -1. So I come up to my graph over here. I go to y equals -1. Okay, here's y equals -1. I can scan this way, but there's no graphs out here. We never go up or down. Remember, you have to stay on y equals 1. So when I come to this side, I do make contact here and here. But notice, that's why we have to look carefully. They want me to make contact with the f graph. And if I'm making contact with the f graph, that's this point right there. So if you notice, this point is -1, -1. So if the y value is -1, the x value is also -1. And just like that, we've answered their third question in this problem. So again, very similar to what we've already done. It's just the graphs are starting to look a little more complicated. Not a big deal. All right, let's see. G of x is equal to 2.5. Once again, they're letting you know that y is 2.5. And if they're telling you the y, then they must be asking for the x that belongs to it. So let's go to that y. It's way up here. There's 2.5 up there. But if I scan this way, I make contact with the graph here. I make contact with the graph here, and I make contact with the graph here. Notice how we end up making contact with the graph in two locations, but they said you're making contact with g of x. So if I roll this way, that's the point we're looking for, which if you notice, we're going to say it's 0.5. So that's the point 0.5 comma 2.5. It's just off the screen there. So then that means when y is 2.5, my x is 0.5. All right, two more questions to go. Let's see how this next one. It says, what is the y-intercept? Way at the bottom, it says, what is the y-intercept of f of x? All right, well, my pink one is f of x. Let me follow it. Let me follow it. Let me follow. Boom. That's when it hits right there. That's the y-intercept right at 2. And that's for the f of x function. So my y-intercept is basically the point 0, 2. Again, we're naming points here. And then the last question says, find the values, plural, look at that, we haven't seen that before, of x. So they do want me to say x equals when f of x is equal to g of x. They're basically saying, hey, when are these two equations equal to each other? All right. Well, they want me to know, they want to know when these two equations are equal to each other. Well, they're only equal to each other wherever they cross. And so when I look at this picture, I do see them crossing at 2 points. I see them crossing right here, which I know it's not perfect. Look at that. It's a weird x value. I don't even make it to negative 1.5, but I'm also past the negative 1. So I'm going to say something like it's negative 1.4, possibly, right? This isn't a perfect little graph, but that's where they meet. But they also meet right here. They're meeting at 2 spots. That's why I need to name 2 x's. I have 2 answers for this problem. But they meet at this x right here, which once again, weird numbered, somewhere between 0 and negative 0.5. I'm just going to say negative 0.3 just to get an idea of what we're talking about. But again, in this picture, this graph makes contact with each other twice. That's what f of x equals g of x is asking. They're saying, when did they cross? Well, these two locations. So again, take your time reading these, of course. All right, let's start looking at number 2 here. See if this one's a little bit easier to work with. Maybe it has better numbers for us. Okay, so first things first, they said, let me look at this picture. And right off the bat, yes, this is a quadratic. It's in vertex form. Luckily, we don't have to draw it. They have done that for us. So here is g of x. All right, so there's our g of x function. And you know what? Anywhere I see a g, I'm going to go and highlight it as a reminder that I'm going to be looking at my orange graph whenever I see that orange color. I'm going to be looking at the g graph. All right, and then I look at my other one and they said, all right, f of x. But notice we don't see it anywhere. That means they want me to draw this, but f of x is just another way of saying y equals, and check that out. This is an equation of the most basic line there is. Y equals x means the y-intercept is 0 because there's nothing being added or subtracted. And then my slope is just a 1. So this is our very traditional rise over run of 1. So it just goes through here, 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 right? All these points, look at that. This is the parent function of all lines. It's the most basic of all lines there is. So now I just need to make a straight line out of it. See, this will work right here. All right, let me make a straight line with this. All right, so that right there is the graph of f of x. Now notice this one, we had to draw it, which is fine. There it is, nicely drawn for us. And so this is our yellow graph. This is where it's going to get a little messy. Unless I could get it right on the side. Okay, so there, just to give us an idea. And now anything that says f, I'm going to go in there, give it a little color, just so that we can visualize what's going on. Now, question number 1. F of 2. Yes, there's your x. All they want is the y value that goes with that x. So if x is 2, then I go up, and yeah, I make contact here, and somewhere up there, but they said we're making contact with yellow. There's the point of contact. That's the 0.22. So just like that, f of 2, the y value is 2. We got our first answer. Next one. The next one says, tell me what g of negative 1 is. Well, we know that negative 1 is being represented or is representing the x. So all they want me to do is find a y value that goes with it. So here's negative 1. And notice if I head down, remember you don't go to the sides. If I head down, I make contact here and here. But that's why I look. With color coding, we know we're looking for this function. We're making contact with the g function. And so look at that point. That point is negative 1, comma 3. Then there's our answer. G of negative 1 is that 3. Now, when I'm looking at letter C, it says, what is x when f of x is equal to negative 1? Sorry, negative 4. All right, well, let's check it out. This is my y value. Y is negative 4. Then obviously they're asking me for an x value. So if y is equal to negative 4, that's down here. There's negative 4. Remember, don't go up or down. You have to stay here. And so they're asking, when do you make contact with the yellow function? Well, if I go this way, there it is. So that would be negative 4, negative 4. There's the point. So if y is negative 4, the x was also negative 4. So we have our answer there too. Remember, you take your time, you read them carefully. The next one says g of x is equal to 1. Well, if g of x is equal to 1, my y value is 1. They want to know what's the x that belongs to it. So here I go to 1, and notice I make contact here. I make contact here with both. Look, orange. And they're asking, when is the orange one going to have a y value of 1? Notice how it happens in 2 locations. If I look at this coordinate, that's the coordinate 1, 1. But if I scan this way, I also make contact right here where it's negative 3 and 1. So if you notice, I actually have 2 places where y is equal to 1, and that's okay. So we're going to say at x equals negative 3. That would be our first one if I'm reading left to right. And at x equals 1. This never happened to us before because before we were dealing with a lot of linear functions only. Now we're dealing with quadratic, so we might have 2 answers, just like we have here. Okay, then there's this one. What is the y-intercept of g of x? Because it's a y-intercept, I'm going to say 0, comma something. All right, let's trace the g. So I'm tracing g, trace, 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 trace. Boom. We made contact with the y-axis. There is my y-intercept. So my y-intercept is right at negative 2. So we throw that in there a little bit easier than the other. And finally, the last question. The last question is asking, when does f of x equal g of x? AKA, when does the yellow and the orange function equal to each other? Well, they're only equal in one spot, and that's when they connect with each other. So look at that. Right there is where they meet, but also right here. So we named that point earlier. That's fine. This is a different question. But they said, give me the x values only. Well, if all they want is x values, we know it's going to happen in 2 spots. So notice they meet right here at negative 2, but they said name the x value, so x equals negative 2. And they meet at this one, which we had already written down as 1, 1, so the x value is 1. So the only difference is because we're dealing with quadratics and other functions now, including that first one was a cubic, we didn't even mention that, we might have more than one answer on some of these problems, unlike what we were doing before. So you're going to try these problems out here. Give them a try first on page 48. Once you do, we can come back to the video so we can double check your answers. So we're going to pause the video for a moment so you can try these out. All right, it's time to see how you did. Let's see. F of 1, there's the x. X is 1, but we said we're making contact with f, which is the orange function. So look at that y value. Negative 1. Done. G of 2. We go to 2, and notice we're already there. We're actually making contact with both, but that's fine. Look, that's the point 20, so the y value is 0. Okay, moving right along. What is x when f of x is equal to 1? So this time they're giving me a y value right there, y equals 1. They want me to find the x, so if y is equal to 1, here it is. Now, luckily, we're not making contact with that yellow one. Look, that would have been a weird fraction. Same thing here, weird decimal. Making contact with orange. So right there, we end up with 3, positive 1. So my answer is 3. Okay, here we go. Now they said g of x is equal to negative 3. That's the y is equal to negative 3. Remember, that's why you have to ask yourself, are they giving me an x or are they giving me a y? This is a y, so I know I'm looking for the x there. So y is negative 3. Here it is. But I'm making contact with g of x, which is yellow. So negative 3, I go this way. There's the point of contact, which is 1, negative 3. So my answer is just a 1. All right, let's keep it going here. Let's see. What is the y-intercept of g of x? That should be easy enough. Here's the g function. I trace. And look at that. Right there's my y-intercept. So right at 0, 0. So the y-intercept is 0, 0. And finally, the last question they said was, when does f of x equal g of x? Well, when I look carefully at this graph, I do notice that they connect in 2 spots. They connect right here, so that one's going to be a little tough to name, and they connect right here. Those are the 2 spots where they connect. Now, this one's easy. We could see that it's right at 2, so I'm going to say x equals 2 right away. This one's a little bit tougher. If we look at that point of contact, we'll say it's halfway, just about. Maybe it's a little more, but we'll just say it's halfway through. So then x is equal to a half or 0.5. Any decimal close to that will be fine, as long as you're not saying 0 or 1. Now, when I'm looking at this next question, it says, here's my x. So obviously they're looking for a y. So check your answers as you go along with us. So here it says x is 2. Here's the 2. But they said make contact with the f function. All right, so I have to go down here. Well, there it is. 2 comma negative 3. So negative 3. Remember, this is a constant function. My answer for anything that's y related with f of x will always be negative 3 for this one. And then it says, what's g of negative 4? All right, then I'm going to go to negative 4. There's my x. They want to know a y value. So negative 4, I'm making contact with the g function. All right, there it is. So it's negative 4 comma 4. So then my answer is 4. That's the y value for that point. Let's keep going here. They said, go back to the f function, but now go to x equals negative 5. Here's x equals negative 5. There's no f function up here, but if I head down, there's the point of contact, which if you notice, it's negative 5, negative 3. Remember what I said earlier. This is a constant function. The answer is always going to be negative 3 for the y value, no matter what they ask on that at least. Then it says, all right, what about if g of x is equal to 5? All right, let's look at g of x equal to 5. So here's g of x is equal to 5. But if I go this way, there's that point of contact. Notice how that's happening at 2, 5. But if I go this way, there's also another point of contact. Remember, that's the thing about parabolas. And that point would be negative 4, comma 5. So when they ask, what is x when g of x is equal to 5? Well, I have 2 of them. It can be x equals negative 4, and it can be x equals positive 2. There was 2 locations where my y value would be a 5 up there. Sorry, I just realized couldn't see it there. But you see, there's 2 spots up here where at 5, we have 2 points that would work. That's why this answer that's why there's 2 answers. Then it says, well, what's the y-intercept of g of x? All right, so the orange one, g of x, look at that right there. There's my y-intercept. So if this is my y-intercept right there, my y-intercept would be negative 3. So I'm going to write it as a point, 0, negative 3. And finally, our last question of the lesson, when does f of x equal g of x? Well, that's very easy to spot as well. We can already see that it's going to happen in two locations. We see that they meet right here at this point, and they also meet right here at this one. Now, if you notice, we've already named this point like 3 times in this problem. That's fine. So they're going to meet at x equals, let's see that first one, right at -2. And they're also going to meet at x equals, well, we had already said that. Look, this is x equals 0. You're not going to name -3. They said, what is the x value? So they meet right at 0. So those are our answers for this backside that you needed to try out. Now go on and test your skills with the assignments for the day. Have a good day, everybody.